Hello. Thank you for joining us for the celebration of our 300th anniversary of West Nottingham Presbyterian Church. Today we will take a virtual cemetery tour. And the first thing we need to know is a little history of this institution. And I will read you this excerpts from a article written by Robert Pryor, a long-serving pastor of the church, for an article that appeared in the Cecil Whig on the 250th anniversary of the congregation. The earliest mention of the congregation, later known as West Nottingham Presbyterian Church, dates back to 1724. The first mention of the congregation is in the Newcastle Presbytery records of March 23, 1724, at a meeting held at Pencader. The minutes read as follows: ordered that Mr. Houston supply the people at the mouth of the Octorara the 5th Sabbath of May, and Mr. Thomas Evans the 3rd Sabbath of April. After many part-time pastors and stated supply pastors, the Reverend William Orr accepted a call and was ordained and installed as West Nottingham's first full-time pastor in the year 1731. In March of 1740, the Reverend Gilbert Tennant, a leader in the Revival Party, preached his famous sermon at West Nottingham entitled "The Dangers of an Unconverted Ministry," from the text Mark 6:34, which became known as the Nottingham Sermon. In 1740, the famous George Whitefield preached at Nottingham to an estimated 8,000 people. In 1741, the Presbyterian Church in the colonies divided due to a split concerning the new evangelism, which came to be known as the New Side, Old Side controversy. The wedge of division was driven through the congregation at Nottingham. The New Side group separated from the congregation at this time and called as its first pastor the Reverend Samuel Finley. The Reverend Samuel Gailey, pastor of the congregation in the middle of the 19th century, wrote the following concerning the two congregations. The New Side meeting house, which was erected at once, stood on the west side of a little stream at the foot of the hill on which the other meeting stood. They were in full view of each other and but a few rods apart. Each congregation could hear the other sing. The new church was designated the Second Nottingham and the old the First Nottingham. Dr. Finley, pastor of the Second Nottingham Church, was an able scholar, and he established a school, later known as West Nottingham Academy. Many men of importance during the colonial and revolutionary period were educated at the academy, two of which were Richard Stockton and Dr. Benjamin Rush, both signers of the Declaration of Independence. In 1761, after the death of his wife, Samuel Finley left West Nottingham to become president of what would become Princeton College in New Jersey. In 1790, after the Old Side, New Side controversy ended, the two congregations were reunited, and in 1800, the congregation agreed on the new site for the church building, which is now the present site of the congregation. In 1803, they were authorized by the Maryland legislature to institute a lottery to raise funds for completing the building. The congregation has existed at this site to the present day, serving the community. As you approach the front of the sanctuary of West Nottingham Presbyterian Church, you will notice two marble tablets mounted on the wall on either side of the pulpit. On the left, we have the tablet commemorating Dr. James McGraw, who by all accounts was a most remarkable person. He arrived here in 1804 as a newly married and newly ordained pastor. When he arrived, this building was not complete. Undeterred, McGraw would preach his sermons in the adjoining woods until the building was finished. According to his colleagues, he could produce a polished sermon with little preparation, all the while managing his large farm and attending to the establishment and operation of West Nottingham Academy. He was described as a natural leader and tireless worker. With his magnetic personality, he rapidly grew the congregation to the point where he established new congregations in Oxford and Charlestown. In 1812, Dr. McGraw would be instrumental in establishing the current West Nottingham Academy, as well as serving as the first president of the Board of Trustees and later as principal. His son Samuel would succeed him as principal. After 31 years of serving the congregation and community, Dr. McGraw met an untimely death from complications following a carriage accident. He and many of his family members are buried in our cemetery. As we walk through the McGraw family plot, you may notice that several monuments and headstones are inscribed with tragic reminders of short lives. Jane Eliza, 15 years, 8 months. Henry Stephen, 7 years, 8 months. Rebecca, who died in 1890, 18 years. And probably the most unique and beautiful is this monument to Rebecca Cochran McGraw, who died in 1865 at 20 years of age. The tablet to the right of the pulpit honors the life of Dr. Samuel Gailey, who served as pastor of this congregation from 1856 until 1893. He also served as president of the Board of Trustees and principal of West Nottingham Academy for much of that time. During his tenure as pastor, the building was expanded to accommodate the ever-growing congregation that eventually exceeded 300 members. This popular pastor and many of his family members are buried in our cemetery. Dr. Gailey is responsible for recording much of the early church history in this book, an historical sketch of the Lower West Nottingham Presbyterian Church, originally published in 1865. Here we have the Gailey family plot. To the left of Samuel is buried his eldest son, Malcolm, and to the far right of him is his first wife, Agnes, and between them, their last-born child, Jeanette, who died in early childhood. Here we have the headstone of Sarah Finley, wife of Samuel Finley, the reverend and educator credited with establishing the first school associated with West Nottingham. This stone, as well as the next one we will see, were moved here from the original location at the old graveyard located in Rising Sun. We think it's noteworthy because of the touching inscription, "In memory of Ms. Sarah Finley, who departed this life July 30th, 1760, aged 42 years. She was a virtuous wife, fond parent, constant friend, lover of God and saints, grave, chaste, and kind, frugal yet generous, active, cheerful, and wise. She lived, beloved, and here lamented lies, yet with joyful raised dead shall rise." Let's take a stroll through the Stones that were moved here from the old cemetery in Rising Sun, while I tell you the story of the second full-time pastor of the Nottingham congregation. His stone is the most prominent in this section. In 1736, a new pastor named John Paul was assigned to the Nottingham congregation. He was also supposed to supply Deer Creek area of Harford County before there were any Presbyterian churches in that county. To those of you familiar with the geography and history of northeastern Maryland, you will have some idea of the barrier the Susquehanna River would have been at the time. No bridges spanned it, no dams tamed it. There was a ferry at Havertygrass then that made the mile-long crossing when they had enough passengers to make it worthwhile. The story goes that a group of pious young men from the Deer Creek area bought a boat and locked it to the tree near the river, and on the Sabbath mornings they would walk 4 or 5 miles to the boat and would row across the Susquehanna to Port Deposit and walk the 7 miles to the Nottingham church. This display of devotion and dedication must have inspired Pastor Paul to increase his efforts in Harford County, and consequently, a new church was established in 1738 in what is now Churchville. Pastor Paul died in 1739 at the age of 33 and was interred in the old graveyard near Rising Sun. According to the record, his headstone was moved to this cemetery in 1958. Many people have asked who is the most famous person buried in the West Nottingham Cemetery. Most people would agree that would be Olabelle Reed. She was a local bluegrass country music legend throughout the 1960s and 70s, and along with her brother Alex, would perform at regional country music venues such as Sunset Park and New River Ranch. Let's take a ride out to the north end of the cemetery, and we'll see where Olabelle is buried along with her husband. In 1982, Olabelle received recognition from the National Endowment for the Arts for her unique clawhammer banjo playing style and her renditions of traditional mountain music. Then, in 1986, she received an honorary doctorate from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, hence the DR in her gravestone. In today's world, she has earned the highest tribute with her own Wikipedia page. A documentary on her life was recently released by a media professor at UMBC titled Olabelle Reed, I've Endured. Here we have what is likely the largest monument in this cemetery. This imposing marker commemorates the life of Maryland's 46th governor, Austin Lane Crothers. He was born in 1860 and raised on his father's farm near Conowingo, then educated at West Nottingham Academy. After receiving his law degree at the age of 30, he practiced law in Elkton until entering politics in 1897 as a Democratic state senator. In 1907, Crothers decided to run for governor, despite being a relative unknown. His run was successful, and he went on to serve his one term as a reformer, supporting such issues as direct election of U.S. senators, improving the Maryland road system, pure food laws, and better care for the mentally ill. Before his term ended, he fell ill and died shortly after leaving office in 1912. This monument, as well as a stained glass window in the chapel, commemorate a tragic event in the Gillespie family history. In 1905, the newly married young missionary couple of Rebecca Gillespie Peel and Reverend John Rogers Peel sailed for China to answer their calling. Shortly after they arrived, they were murdered. We don't know if it was a random act of violence or connected to the recently concluded Boxer Rebellion that targeted Western influences, particularly Christian missionaries. Despite the cause, the Gillespie family, citing their strong Christian faith, said they did not harbor ill will toward the Chinese people. Beneath this relatively modest monument lies the body of possibly the wealthiest person in this cemetery. James Gailey was the second son of Reverend Samuel Gailey and his wife Agnes. He spent his formative years in the manse across the street and attended West Nottingham Academy. At the age of 16, he continued his studies at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and received a degree in mine engineering. His first job out of college was a chemist at an ironworks, earning a salary of $500 a year. Even by the standards of the day, $500 a year must have seemed like a paltry salary for a college graduate. But his fortunes changed dramatically when, at the age of 30, he landed a management job at one of Andrew Carnegie's steel mills. James introduced several changes to the steel-making process that vastly improved production, and he was handsomely rewarded with promotions, and in 1901, he was appointed vice president of U.S. Steel, the successor to Carnegie Steel. James didn't forget his humble roots growing up here at West Nottingham. Despite living and eventually dying in New York City, he chose to be buried here along with his family. He also donated the church bell that is inscribed "In Memory of Childhood Days," along with the Tiffany stained glass windows in memory of his parents. Thank you for joining me on this virtual tour of West Nottingham Presbyterian Church Cemetery. To learn more of the history of this 300-year-old congregation, visit our website at westnottinghampc.com.